به هر حال بعد از گروگانگیری روحانیت حاکم آقای خمینی و اعضای حزب جمهوری اسلامی راه حل رو در این دیدن که یک پنهانی قراردادی با دستگاه ریگان و بوش بسازند و گروگان ها آزاد بشن. این مسئله معروف شد به افتضاح اکتبر سورپرایز. شما لطف کنید در این باره توضیح بدید که اصولاً اکتبر سورپرایز چه معنی داره و چه کسانی در اون دخیل بودن و چه نتایجی داشت.
عرض کنم به شما که نه، اونا معامله کردن که گروگان ها تا انتخابات ریاست جمهوری جمهوری امریکا آزاد نشوند، تا کارتر شکست بخوره ریگان پیروز بشه. همینطور هم شد. خب تماس هایی که این دستگاه آقای ریگان گرفتن از بهار شروع میشه، از بهار 59 و 1980 میلادی. هم با دوستان من در خارج کشور تماس گرفته بودن، هم با اون طرف طرف معامله، بعدها شدن طرف معامله، یعنی دستگاه رهبری حزب جمهوری اسلامی و دستگاه آقای خمینی. خب من نپذیرفتم، برای اینکه این با استقلال ایران سازگاری نداشت و معنی اولا ریگانیسم رو هم خطرناک میدونستم و موافقم نبودم که ایران بر عهده بگیرد مسئولیت روی کار آمدن ریگان رو، اونم از راه یک معامله پنهانی سر گروگان ها. در تابستان فرزند آقای پسندیده، آقای رضای پسندیده، نزد من آمد، گفت من رفته بودم به اسپانیا، در اونجا امریکایی ها با من تماس گرفتن. خب کدوم امریکایی ها؟ این دستگاه آقای ریگان، نه دولت امریکا. البته ظاهرش دولت امریکا بوده، ولی اون کسی که به نمایندگی دولت امریکا رفته بوده از قرار آقای گرگ بوده، مشاور آقای بوش، معاون رئیس جمهوری. او به نام اون طرف صحبت کرده بود. بعد هم ایشون به من گفت که شما اگر نپذیرید معامله رو با اون طرف خواهند کرد. در خاطرات آقای پسندیده پدر ایشون هم مطلبی هست که به اصطلاح تا حدودی روشنش سرراسته. میگه اگر چون بنی صدر نپذیرفت معامله با اون طرف شد، مضمونش اینه. خب آقای صادق طباطبایی رو آقای خمینی مأمور کرده بود که با دستگاه کارتر گفتگو کنه سر گروگان رو. او هم رفته بود آلمان، از طریق آقای گنشر با حکومت کارتر تماس گرفته بود و معاون وزارت خارجه امریکا این رو فرستاده بودن آلمان با او گفتگو کنه. خب از کجا معلوم که شما نماینده فرستاده آقای خمینی هستی؟ او هم گفته بود که غیر از خود او 2 نفر بیشتر اطلاع ندارن از اون سفر ایشون. یکی آقای احمد خمینی است، یکی آقای هاشمی رفسنجانی. او گفته بود که توافقی رو 4 اصلی که بعدها آقای خمینی اعلان کرد، این شما اینها رو تنظیم کنید، ایشون اعلان خواهد کرد. این دلیل که من نماینده هستم. همینطور هم شد. با اینکه قبلا دستگاه آقای کارتر با 5 شرط موافقت کرده بود، خیلی هم به سود ایران بود، آقای خمینی اون 4 شرط اعلان کرد و مجلس دست کرد تا انتخابات یک روز قبل از انتخابات ریاست جمهوری. بعد به اتفاق آرا همونو تصویب کرد. اینه که اگر این بود که شما حق اضافه کم نداری از اون 4 اصل، روز اول چرا نکردی؟ آقای هاشمی رفسنجانی روز انتخابات ریاست جمهوری امریکا همون روزی که ریگان شد رئیس جمهور گفت در تاریخ خواهند گفت ما ریگان رو به ریاست جمهوری امریکا رسوندیم، خیلی علنی آشکار کردیم، معامله رو انجام دادیم. چرا میگوین اکتبر سورپرایز؟ به لحاظی که در 19 تا 21 اکتبر این معامله در پاریس بین فرستادگان آقای خمینی و فرستادگان دستگاه ریگان و بوش، یعنی ستاد تبلیغاتی ریگان و بوش، در پاریس این معامله انجام گرفته. به این قدر این مسئله در تاریخ امریکا اهمیت پیدا کرد که حالا هر نوبت که انتخابات میشه در امریکا، اون دمدمای آخر صحبت از این میشود که حالا اکتبر سورپرایز چه خواهد بود. چنانکه وقتی آقای بوش برای دور دوم میخواست انتخاب بشود، خیلی فرض‌ها کردن که اکتبر سورپرایز که ایشون به کار خواهد بود برای اینکه دوباره انتخاب بشه چه خواهد بود. بعد معلوم شد نوار آقای بن لادن است. 24 ساعت قبل از انتخابات اون نوار کمک کرد که آقای بوش دوباره رئیس جمهور بشه. بعدم خودش هم تصدیق کرد که اون نوار بهش خیلی کمک کرد در رئیس جمهور شدن. به این دلیل بهش میگفتن اکتبر سورپرایز. بعد من رفتم به امریکا به لحاظ که انتشار کتاب مایتن تو اسپیک که من نوشته بودم، یعنی در مصاحبه با یک خبرنگار فرانسوی، او در اونجا کمیسیون امور خارجی مجلس نمایندگان از من دعوت کرد. اونجا رفتم و توضیحات دادم. نتیجه ای شد که قرار شد که یک کمیسیون تحقیق تشکیل بشه که اون کمیسیون تحقیق برای اینکه اون نتیجه حقیقت رو نگوید، اولا اون چه از سند و گزارش از من گرفت اونا که سانسور کرد، مال دولت روسیه شوروی سابق رو که جاسوساش گزارش کرده بودن که همچه معامله در پاریس به این ترتیب انجام گرفت به تاریخ همون زمان ها و تاریخ همون اکتبر 1980. اینا رو بعد دولت بعدی به تقاضای اون کمیسیون برای اون کمیسیون فرستاده بود. میگفتم اون دیر رسیده. به هرچی مدرکی که نشون میداد که معامله انجام گرفته سانسور کردن و اینجور مثلا به این نتیجه رسوندن. ما نمیگوییم که معامله نشده است، اما مدرکی داده بر این که معامله شده هستن به دست نیاوردیم که بعد اون روبرت باری رفت توی همون بایگانی همون کمیسیون تحقیق اون مدارک سانسور شده رو بیرون آورد، یک بیگ انتشار داد.
April 16th, in a program entitled The Election Held Hostage, Frontline aired allegations of a secret agreement between the Iranian government and the 1980 Reagan-Bush campaign. It was an agreement to delay the release of 52 American hostages held in Iran. As reported by Frontline, arms transfers, allegedly a payoff, began just after Ronald Reagan's inauguration. But those sales were only the first of many secret arms sales to come. Tonight, Bill Moyers examines the Iran-Contra affair.
North Notebooks. Joshua has approved proceeding. If these conditions are acceptable to the banana, then oranges are ready to proceed.
We did not, repeat, did not trade weapons for hostages, nor will we.
North Notebooks. Center the activity in the White House.
I'm not going to tell falsehoods to the American people, and I'll leave that to others.
It would be one of the last messages left in Oliver North's computer file.
I am honored to have served the President, you, and your predecessors these past 5.5 years. I only regret that I could not have done so better. My prayer is that the President is not damaged by what has transpired and that the hostages will not be harmed as a consequence of what we now do. Finally, I remain convinced that what we tried to accomplish was worth the risk. We nearly succeeded. Hopefully, when the political fratricide is finished, there will be others, in a moment of calm reflection, who will agree. Warmest regards, Semper Fidelis.
Semper Fidelis. always faithful. But a Marine's oath of loyalty is to the Constitution of the United States, above his commander-in-chief. When that loyalty is reversed, it can lead to this, a moment in our history without precedent. The former president of the United States summoned to testify at the criminal trial of his national security advisor.
Mr. President. Hi. See you.
Sir, would you raise your right?
Talking with the minister of the oath to you.
You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in a cause now before this court should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Would you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Ronald Reagan. R-E-A-G-A-N.
Admiral John Poindexter was charged with lying to Congress and obstruction. In his defense, he had called his former boss to the witness stand.
Mr. President,
Good morning.
you and I have never met or talked before, so let me just take a minute and just introduce myself. My name is Richard.
For 10 hours over 2 days, Ronald Reagan was questioned about crimes that could have brought down his presidency.
Just in a very general sense, Mr. President, I take it you have some recollection of the events that led up to what is now called, for lack of a better word, the Iran-Contra affair or the Iran-Contra event?
Yes. Did you...
Yeah, I was just asking if you had some general recollection about the event.
Yes. It was a covert action that was taken at my behest.
It was 4 years ago that we first learned of the scandal triggered by Ronald Reagan's behest. 4 years, and it isn't over yet. We keep learning about the vast spiderweb of secrecy organized by the White House to carry out the president's orders. Because of sources and records revealed during the trials that followed the congressional investigation, and because of the Freedom of Information Act, we can get a fuller picture of what went on, who knew, and who was actually responsible. Among those documents are the computer notes the president's men didn't manage to destroy, minutes of secret meetings where the decisions were made, and the personal notebooks of Oliver North. What they tell us is more than one more chapter in the running battle between Congress and the White House to control foreign policy. That's an old story. What they tell us is what happens when that conflict goes underground. What they tell us is this. Both the Iran and Contra operation shared a command post here in the Executive Office building next to the White House. From here, Oliver North dispatched his computer messages.
North to Secord. The unit to which we wanted to drop in the southern quadrant of Nicaragua is in desperate need of ordnance resupply. Hope we can make this happen right this time. If we are ever going to take the pressure off the northern front, we've got to get this drop in quickly.
Lieutenant Colonel North was supervising a war in Central America.
North to McFarland. There is great despair that we may fail in this effort, and the resistance support account is darn near broke. Any thoughts where we can put our hands on a quick 3 to 5 million?
McFarland to North. I've been thinking about the blowpipe problem in the Contras. Could you ask the CIA to identify which countries the Brits have sold them to? I ought to have a contact in at least one of them. How are you coming on the loose ends for the materiel transfer? Anything I can do? If for any reason you need some mortars or other artillery, please let me know.
The Contra Army had been organized by the United States to destroy the leftist government of Nicaragua. North's job was to supply the guerrillas.
North to McFarland. There is an urgent need for additional intelligence. It is therefore proposed that, weather permitting, SR-71 and U-2 aircraft be used.
President approved.
He was just the kind of a guy that Ronald Reagan would like. He was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and crisp and seemed to have answers right at the tip of his tongue. And it always bothered me that the President of the United States was getting his information from this guy instead of getting it from Cap Weinberger or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Here was a young lieutenant colonel who was an authority on Central America, the Middle East, and all sorts of things being brought in to brief the President of the United States. He would fly over to Beirut for the weekend as the national security team member, come back into the Oval Office on Monday morning and brief the President on what was going on over there.
The other half of Iran-Contra began here in the Middle East, in decisions made in the very first days of the new administration. Here, American interest and American lives were caught between volatile and violent factions. The year before Reagan's election, Iranian fanatics had seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Washington responded by declaring Iran a terrorist nation and imposing an arms embargo. The regime that had so reviled America, whose leader still denounced the U.S. as a great Satan, was prohibited by U.S. law from receiving American arms directly or indirectly. But America's chief ally in the region, Israel, wanted to sell American arms to the Ayatollah irrespective of the law. For the scheme to work, the Israelis needed willing players in the new administration. And they had them early on.
It seems to have started in earnest in the period probably prior to the election of 1980, as the Israelis had identified who would become the new players in the national security area in the Reagan administration. And I understand some contacts were made at that time. Between Israelis and these new players. Now, my own personal first-hand knowledge starts when I'm Assistant Secretary of State in early February 1981. And within a few months, we received a press report from TASS that an Argentinian plane had crashed. And according to the documents, crashed in Soviet territory. This was chartered by Israel, and it was carrying American military equipment to Iran. It was clear to me, after my conversations with people on high, that indeed we had agreed that the Israelis could transship to Iran some American origin military equipment. And the net result was a violation of American law.
Israel hoped that arming the Ayatollah would keep the deadly war going between its enemies, Iran and Iraq. The Israelis signaled their intention to the Reagan State Department in advance, and the State Department secretly said yes.
Very small and informally done. But of course you couldn't do it informally. That's what the laws were about. But I think you see here certain germs of the later Iran-Contra.
Thousands of miles distant and almost simultaneously, the Iran-Contra scandal was taking root in Nicaragua. The Contra War was begun as a covert CIA operation, with administration assurances that they were simply trying to stop the arms flow in Central America, not overthrow the Sandinistas. But in early 1984, Nicaragua's harbors were mined. The operation was performed by Latin mercenaries in the direct employ of the CIA.
The missions were always controlled by the CIA. Those of us who fought, who were, so to speak, the cannon fodder, were Honduran. But we were controlled by the gringos. They gave us the orders. We sabotage harbors, refineries, shipyards, bridges. We never use our own uniforms. We use Contra uniforms so that the foreign press will think the Contras were doing all the work, and the Americans could walk away with their hands clean.
Though there had been no declaration of war by the U.S. Congress, this was very much America's war. And when Congress did learn of the CIA's direct role in the operations, tensions over the undeclared war exploded.
This is a war against the people of Nicaragua. This is a war against the government of Nicaragua. This is not a war about stopping the arms flow.
Here we go again. Once again, when the going gets tough, the United States quits.
And you may think they will overlook the Contras' terrorist tactics, but you are wrong. The American people are outraged.
The Constitution is explicit. It gives Congress, and Congress alone, the power to declare war. The last presidential war had left bitter memories.
Saigon, 1975. I can still see the helicopters lifting off the embassy, while the tears and the arms outstretched of the people who believed in us, who trusted in us, recede into the distance as we abandon them. And now
we're engaged with some 15,000 people in the overthrow of this government. That is the purpose, and that is what this Congress 3 successive times has rejected. It's what's overwhelmingly rejected by the American people, and no number.
Congress also controls the purse strings. So when this debate ends, Congress exercises its fundamental constitutional power. The Boland Amendment will outlaw the use of U.S. funds for military operations in Nicaragua. The White House will face a stark choice: either respect Congress's decision or devise a way around the law. As the official minutes from this June 1984 meeting of the President's National Security Planning Group make clear, that choice will be made at the very top.
National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane. There seems to be no prospect that the Democratic leadership will provide for any vote on the Nicaraguan program. The President. It all hangs on support for the anti-Sandinistas. How can we get that support in the Congress? We have to be more active. UN Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick. If we can't get the money for the anti-Sandinistas, then we should make the maximum effort to find the money elsewhere. Secretary of State George Shultz. I would like to get the money for the Contras also, but Jim Baker said that if we go out and try to get money from third countries, it is an impeachable offense. CIA Director William Casey. Jim Baker said that if we tried to get money from third countries without notifying the oversight committees, it could be a problem. Secretary Shultz. Baker's argument is that the U.S. government may raise and spend funds only through an appropriation of the Congress. The President. We must obtain the funds to help these freedom fighters. Vice President George Bush. The only problem that might come up is if the United States were to promise to give these third parties something in return, so that some people could interpret this as some kind of an exchange. Mr. McFarlane. I certainly hope none of this discussion will be made public in any way. The President. If such a story gets out, we'll all be hanging by our thumbs in front of the White House until we find out who did it.
Although some of his own advisors had raised the specter of impeachment, the President will decide to continue the war. He had taken his case to the Congress, as the Constitution prescribes. He had fought it out politically, as the Constitution assumes, and the President had lost.
In 1984, when Congress flatly prohibited American aid to the Contras, did President Reagan understand what Congress meant when it said that?
Yes, I believe he did. He just didn't believe that it was a legitimate authority of the Congress to say that. That he, rather than the Congress, determined how he would conduct, in this case, the support of the freedom fighters.
So he chose to disregard Congress.
Yes.
Congress passed a bill called what has been referred to as the Boland Amendment. Do you recall that?
Yes, and it was consistent with the attitude of Congress toward this whole thing.
And what was that?
Well, we had to fight to get any level of help for the Contras, and they kept getting more resistant as time went on and as we had to replace monies that had already been used up and so forth, until finally they just shut off the spigot and tried to make it that we could not give any help.
He believed this was a political struggle.
But then why didn't he go public and say to the American people, we're going to get aid for the Contras, and I'm going to ask you to decide who is right, Congress or me?
Well, I think to take a stand on principle, which I'm saying this was for him, that would have been the right course. The people in his staff, the legislative leadership of his White House, said, no, That will never wash. It will get you a huge congressional backlash that will be expressed in everything from your budget to domestic programs.
In other words, you can't win the argument.
That's right.
Publicly, openly.
Not with the Congress, no.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
1984 is an election year, and in election years, peace is good politics. A national poll taken in the summer showed almost 70% of the public disapproved of the president's policy in Central America. So his PR men keep the lid on.
In 1984, you were moving toward the re-election campaign. The president was doing well in the polls. He had lost the battle in Congress on aid to the Contras. The president could have gone public. He was a terrific politician when it came to communicating to the masses. Why didn't he do that?
He did, you know, after the election. He went to
Yes, but not in the election. And the election isn't the election where we should fight these things out?
I can't answer that. Whether it was simply because the congressional people were telling him this was not the time, or what, I can't answer that.
And weren't the polls telling him that, in fact, his position was not that popular in Central America? You didn't want the campaign to re-election to be fought out around Central America.
Absolutely. Never. Because if we'd have fought the campaign on Central America, we might have lost.
A lot good about the United States of America, and I hope they're going to... Yes, I've traveled all through this land. Reagan 84!
The administration had failed to carry the Congress. They wouldn't chance it with the voters, so they turned to subterfuge.
August 28, 84, north to McFarland. Calero suggested if he could not make it to the U.S. by the end of the week, North could meet with him on Friday in Honduras. Recommendation that you authorize travel orders.
McFarland, exercise absolute stealth, no visible meeting, no press awareness of your presence in the area.
Throughout the election year, exercising stealth, they conduct their war from the White House.
The president. How would the resistance take them out? CIA Director Casey. They could attack them on the ground, and there is the chance that they could mount an operation against the ship that offloads them at Bluefields. Secretary of State Schultz. We should, however, make it clear to the resistance that we do have certain minimum requirements. No U.S. personnel on the operation, no direct CIA involvement in the attack. National Security Advisor McFarland. There's also the matter of public perception. We need to recognize that whether or not we help, we will be blamed. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger. That's right. The danger is in doing something without preparing the public and changing their perception. The President. Let me throw some flies in the milk on this one. Several months ago, I made a speech about Soviet ships delivering tanks and other military equipment to Nicaragua. That certainly didn't arouse any great public outcry against the Sandinistas. I don't see how going public with our concerns is going to help. Secretary Weinberger. No matter what, we need to start preparing the Congress. The President. After the resistance acts, we can raise it with the public and Congress. Chief of Staff James Baker. This is the worst time of all to try to prepare any public opinion on any activities in Central America.
In 1985, Ronald Reagan once again took his oath to uphold the Constitution, to see that the laws are faithfully executed.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
With the election behind them, the president's men are more defiant of Congress than ever. They look elsewhere for money to support the Contra war. They will seek it from wealthy Americans and from friendly governments abroad.
North Notebooks, February 4, 85. Highest levels increasingly inclined to contribute $2 million. Need White House indication.
The president himself takes the lead, asking for money from the heads of state of third countries, allies dependent on American weapons or money, or both. Saudi Arabia's King Fahd is the first to step forward after CIA Director Casey approached him for assistance.
North Notebooks, March 4, 85. McFarland meeting. Plan includes $25 to $50 million, third country support, CIA intelligence. Center the activity in the White House.
I was describing specifically the donation King Fahd volunteered February of 85, and that would be given to the Contras and that they would use it to carry on the struggle.
What did you mean when you talked about the center of activity in the White House?
Well, it had come from Fahd to the president at the White House, and it had gone from there to the Contras.
The money is clearly intended to keep the Contras in the field while U.S. aid is prohibited. At least 10 countries will be solicited for military support, including Israel, South Korea, Panama, and Taiwan.
North Notebooks. Need to have contact with Taiwanese. Need some overture with Korea. Sultan of Brunei, 100,000 for cholera.
Mr. President, did you personally ask third countries to contribute money to the Contras?
Sam, I made an opening statement, and I have said that I'm not going to answer any questions on those things until this is over. If I were going to answer any questions, I'd say no.
Sorry, since you didn't answer that question.
Do you recall having a meeting with King Fahd of Saudi Arabia?
I do. And as he was leaving the Oval Office and I was escorting him to the door, he told me of the contribution that he had been making to the Contras. There had been no discussion of that in our meeting until then. He told me that, and his last words were that he was going to double it.
Did he tell you what the amount was that he was going to double?
Yes.
What was that amount?
$1 million.
So he was going to double it to $2 million?
Yes.
And do you recall what your response to him was when he told you that?
Yes, I said, I think that's fine.
That was $2 million per month, I take it, correct?
You know, the silly thing is, my memory, I was just remembering it as a year. You may be right. I just, in my memory, and having to hark back to it, I just thought he was talking about the total each year that he was giving.
Do you recall having a meeting as well with a head of state of an Asian country? And I'm going to ask you to just tread a little bit lightly here because we can't discuss what the particular Asian country might be. But does that jog your memory at all?
No, it doesn't.
I figured it might. But that...
No, as a matter of fact, I never made any effort to find out which of our friendly countries and so forth were engaged in this or doing anything. I thought it was better unmentioned.
But unmentioned favors can produce unmentioned demands, putting American policy at the mercy of its secret partners. A president who chooses to act entirely on his own, secretly and off the record, has neutralized the checks and balances of democracy. The rest of the government and the people are shut out. By 1985, there is a new hostage crisis in the Middle East. Pro-Iranian terrorists in Lebanon have kidnapped 7 Americans, including one possessed of vital American secrets, the CIA station chief in Beirut.
I am well, and my friends been in the rear, and Jeremy within, also well. We ask that our government take action for our release quickly.
Despite the individual pleas, the administration's stated policy is firm.
Freedom, democracy, and peace have enemies. The United States gives terrorists no rewards and no guarantees. We make no concessions. We make no deals.
But through high-level contacts in Israel, the administration learns Iran might be willing to make a deal. swapping hostages for arms. As the president recovers from surgery, his advisors gather at his bedside to make the case. For 100 American-made TOW missiles, Iran will release 4 of the 7 hostages. The arms will move through Israel to provide deniability.
To the hospital, and Don Regan, your chief of staff, was there, and he gave you a little bit of overview as to what Israel was doing. Do you recall that at all?
I recall that I had visits every once in a while there at the hospital. I have to tell you, I can't really recall what those visits were about. Nothing was tremendously earth-shaking according to my memory, but I'm afraid that I wasn't maybe quite up to pinning things down.
Hardly has the president returned to the White House from the hospital than the deal is implemented. The public knows nothing about it, but after 2 shipments totaling more than 500 missiles, only one hostage, Benjamin Weir, is released. The administration holds the news for 3 days while the president, the vice president, and their advisors debate how to handle it. Oliver North is finally designated to draft the welcome home script.
North Notebooks, September 16, 85. In the name of the President of the U.S., I welcome you back to the USA. Family has been through trauma beyond measure because of love for you. What happens to those left behind depends totally on you. Greatest Christian task may be in the next few days ahead. Revelations regarding your release will accelerate competition for holding others, killing, new seizures.
By the end of 1985, the hostages, like the Contras, have become a presidential obsession. Reagan is determined to satisfy the hostage families by the holidays. It is Oliver North who turns the president's obsession into action, secretly bartering missiles for men.
North Notebooks. 600 tows equals 1 release. 6 hours later, 2,000 tows equals 3 releases. 23 hours later, 600 tows equals 1 release.
Do you think the president is willing to cut some kind of a deal, any kind of a deal, to win the release of the hostages?
All I know is that his stance is that we do not negotiate with terrorists.
November 20, 85, north to Poindexter. The Israelis will deliver 80 Hawks at noon on Friday, 22nd November. These 80 will be loaded aboard 3 chartered aircraft owned by a proprietary, which will take off at 2-hour intervals. There is the requirement for 40 additional weapons of the same nomenclature. $10 million in payment for the first 80 has been deposited in the appropriate account. There is the distinct possibility that at the end of the week we will have 5 Americans home and the promise of no future hostage takings in exchange for selling the Israelis 120 Hawks. It isn't that bad a deal. North Notebooks, November 26, 85. Meeting with Poindexter. Ronald Reagan directed operation to proceed. If Israelis want to provide, then we will replenish. Call from Poindexter. Schultz aware. Cargo must be listed as machine parts, spares for oil industry.
So the president approves yet another hostage deal, a 3rd shipment of arms. Most of his advisors are with him. They will not notify Congress as the law requires. There will be no formal presidential authorization beforehand, also required by law. But they will contrive a cover story about equipment for drilling oil. Despite the sale, no hostage is released. Vice President George Bush expresses his appreciation anyway.
November 27, 85. Dear Ollie, as I head off to Maine for Thanksgiving, I just want to wish you a happy one, with the hope you get some well-deserved rest. Your dedication and tireless work with the hostage thing and with Central America really gives me cause for great pride in you. And thanks, George Bush.
In Central America, the Saudi money is virtually all that is keeping the Contras going. So the White House begins to lean on the small, dependent governments there, like Honduras. The deal is simple. You help the guerrillas bring down Nicaragua. We'll help you with weapons and money.
Everybody at attention before we brought the Air Force through.
It is a quid pro quo, verging on bribery. and they know it.
February 20, 85, north to McFarland. It is very clear from the debate that the legislative intent was to deny any direct or indirect support for military, paramilitary operations in Nicaragua. To date, all administration officials have been able to state to the Congress that we have not approached any other government to support the resistance. Once the memo and the attached cable are transmitted, we will no longer be able to make such a claim. We still believe that our original concept of an emissary is the proper way in which to proceed.
They are leery of using the U.S. ambassador to enforce the deal. He could be called before Congress for questioning. So the White House sends an emissary who can deliver the goods, immune from accountability. As the government itself will eventually admit in Oliver North's trial, Vice President Bush delivers the quid, more than $100 million in expedited military, economic, and CIA assistance, the stuff that keeps governments in power. And Honduras agrees to the quo, serving as a base for the Contras in the war against Nicaragua.
Honduras, there was no quid pro quo.
As president, George Bush will still deny what his own government had acknowledged in open court.
And for those who suggest there was, the onus is on them. The word of the President of the United States, George Bush, is there was no quid pro quo. The records of the meeting demonstrate that there was no quid pro quo. Thank you for asking that question. Yes.
Honduras knows how to work the deal it struck. Just 2 months after the vice president's visit, Honduran President Suazo arrives in Washington to meet with Reagan, Bush, and much of the cabinet. He is there to up the ante by asking for more aid. Another quid pro quo is at the heart of the meeting.
May 21, 85, McFarland to President Reagan. It will be important to reiterate to Suazo the importance we attach to his continued cooperation in enabling the FDN to remain a viable element of pressure on the Sandinistas. Without making the linkage too explicit, it would be useful to remind Suazo that in return for our help, we do expect cooperation in pursuit of our mutual objectives. You could underline the seriousness of our security commitment, which the Hondurans seem to regard as the main quid pro quo for cooperating with the FDN.
In return for our help in the form of security assurances as well as aid, that we do expect cooperation, that we feel that there's an obligation on their part to...
So in other words, some aid and assistance is given to them. You would expect some aid and assistance back from them in combating the spread of the Sandinistas.
Yeah.
Honduras will become the 8th largest recipient of American economic and military aid in the world. It is a country the size of Tennessee. In fact, every country in Central America will be pressured, intimidated, or solicited by officials of the U.S. government seeking help for the Contras. The administration has created a private foreign policy operation outside the channels of government, unaccountable to constitutional control. It is in constant need of money. By early 1986, the president has approved 3 shipments of missiles to Iran. They have bought the release of just 1 hostage. Of the 6 others held the summer the trading began, 1 has been killed in captivity. 5 remain. The dealings go on, and so do the denials.
The decision is, at what point can you pay off to terrorists without endangering people from here on out once they find out that their tactics succeed?
Are you still opposed to negotiating with terrorists?
This has always been a position of ours, yes.
But at 10 high-level meetings, top officials have discussed the arms shipments to the terrorists. George Bush has attended at least 5. He also heads the president's task force on terrorism.
Today I am proud to deliver to the American people the result of the 6 months' effort to review our policies and our capabilities to deal with terrorism. Our policy is clear, concise, unequivocal. We will offer no concession to terrorists because that only leads to more terrorism. States that practice terrorism or actively support it will not be allowed to do so without consequence.
What is stated as official policy is reported as official policy. They find it easy to protect their secrets.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
What are you planning? Are you going to use strikes?
Well, as the president says, we're not telling.
Okay.
The newest secret is that the last arms shipment netted a profit of $800,000. So, behind the scenes, prompted by CIA Director Casey, they debate a new and larger transaction, selling American weapons themselves, directly to Iran instead of through Israel. This way, they can set the price and control the profits.
Mr. President, do you recall at all that it would be better for the United States to be shipping these weapons directly rather than having Israeli ship weapons and then being replenished by the United States? Does that ring any bells with you at all, Mr. President?
No, I don't recall that that coming up at all. And as a matter of fact, to this day, I don't know who finished the delivery of the missiles. I know that we could not have flown a plane into Iran, and that would have destroyed the whole covertness of the operation and exposed these individuals.
Did you at any time recall being informed by Admiral Poindexter as to who some of the people were that were working on this this Iranian missile project, if you will?
The only name that I recall being involved in out at that end of it was Colonel North.
January 4, 86, North to Poindexter. Draft memo for the President. Since the Israeli sales are technically a violation of our Arms Export Control Act embargo for Iran, a presidential covert action finding is required.
To make it legal, the President will sign a secret finding declaring further shipments to be important to national security.
January 17, 86, Poindexter to President Reagan. The Iranians have indicated an immediate requirement for 4,000 tow weapons. Both sides have agreed the hostages will be immediately released upon commencement of this action.
It is clear the government is trading arms for hostages. But despite the legal requirement that Congress be informed, the President will postpone notification indefinitely.
The President was briefed verbally from this paper. The Vice President, Don Regan, and Don Fortier were present. February 1, 86, Poindexter to McFarland. The hostage plan is still working, and it calls for the hostages to be released on 9 February. Schultz and Weinberger still disagree on policy grounds, but are cooperating. Bill Casey, Ed Meese, Don Regan, and I are fully on board this risky operation. But most importantly, President and Vice President are solid in taking the position that we have to try.
North to McFarland. With the grace of the good Lord and a little more hard work, we will very soon have 5 American citizens home and be on our way to a much more positive relationship than one which barters toes for lives.
February 27, 86, McFarland to North. Roger, Ollie. Well done. If the world only knew how many times you have kept a semblance of integrity and gumption to U.S. policy, they would make you Secretary of State. But they can't know and would complain if they did. Such is the state of democracy in the late 20th century.
The Iranians accept 1,000 more missiles without releasing even one hostage. But they pay triple market price for the weapons, and the deal generates a $5.5 million profit. The arms sales have become big business, off the shelf and off the books, accountable only to the inside traders. The profits will wind up not in the U.S. Treasury, but in a private slush fund, what North, Casey and Company now call the Enterprise. Nearly $4 million of it will keep the Contras supplied with the weapons of war, despite the congressional ban. The profits from the arms deals, added to the money raised from third countries, enable the President to evade the Constitution's most basic check on a president's power.
May 2, 86, Poindexter to Don Fortier. Yesterday, in a meeting that I had with the President, he started the conversation with, "I am really serious. If we can't move the Contra package before June 9, I want to figure out a way to take action unilaterally to provide assistance.
May 16, 86, north to Poindexter. You should be aware that the Resistance Support Organization now has more than 6 million available for immediate disbursement. This reduces the need to go to third countries for help. It does not, however, reduce the urgent need to get the CIA back in the management of this program. Unless we do this, we'll run increasing risks of trying to manage this program from here, with the attendant physical and political liabilities. The more money there is, the more visible the program becomes. While I care not a whit what they say about me, it could well become a political embarrassment for the President and you.
Could you please describe to the jury what you know about Oliver North and what his job was when he was working in the White House?
It was my impression, and not from any specific reports or anything, that through all of this, that he was communicating back and forth between and the need for the support of the Contras and so forth.
When you say communicating back and forth between, could you be a little more explicit for the jury, even though you and I might know?
Yeah.
Maybe
well,
explain
I mean,
to the jury what you're referring
between
to.
the Contras and their situation and ourselves and the things that we must do for them.
President Reagan doesn't retain very much of what comes his way on a given day. And if he read something in the morning and were to be asked about it a week or so later, he might very well not remember. Many people are like that. Certainly we all forget things, but
Something of this importance, something of this magnitude, an off-the-shelf effort to help the Contras, the freedom fighters who were so important to him, he would forget the details?
Well, the president, on hearing that, would draw a conclusion. Is this right or wrong? And he would say, certainly, this is right. But saying it's right then enables him to clean the memory disk and to say, okay, what I heard is right, and I've forgotten a little bit about what it was, but it was right. And not parse the politics, legalities, the other implications of it.
You were not aware and did not learn of North's activities in supplying the Contras with military aid. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure I'm understanding this. My major was in economics, not law.
President, I'm asking you what I believe you just told me a moment ago, which is that you did not learn of that back in 1985 and 1986 when it was going on. Did you not just tell me that a few moments ago?
Well, what I'm saying is that I could answer, and even then in a general way, as to what his task was and what he was doing, but I wasn't following it day by day so that I could pin down and say, this is what he is doing today, and this. I can't, I just don't have that kind of a memory.
But do you stick by the answer then in your interrogatory that you did not know and did not learn of that activity? That's my question to you here.
Sustained.
Well, what activity?
That's not right. You don't have to answer.
Every day he got intelligence reports in black and white, for the CIA was reporting. Here's what we are learning in Nicaragua, and it included the supply of weapons, the supply of money. Well, the president could have said, gee, who could that be? John? Ollie? What's going on? So the point is that if I were in Colonel North's shoes, I would have drawn the same conclusion, that the president knows, the president supports, and carried on.
Poindexter to North. I am afraid you're letting your operational role become too public. From now on, I don't want you to talk to anybody else, including Casey, except me, about any of your operational roles. In fact, you need to quietly generate a cover story that I have insisted that you stop.
May 1986, the president approves a secret trip to Tehran by Robert McFarlane. The Iranians have said they will receive an emissary, provided he brings spare parts for missiles. McFarlane does, but no hostage is released. Returning to Washington discouraged, he reports to Reagan and Bush.
We did not succeed in getting the hostages released. The current state of government in Iran lacks competence. The competents were decapitated. I recommend no more meetings until the hostages are released.
This video is being recorded on the 25th day of July, 1986. I am David Jacobson, the hospital director of the American...
As with the secret deals in Central America, the secret deals with Iran have left the United States open to blackmail.
On which date I was taken political hostage. That was 424 days ago.
North Notebooks, July 27, 86. Criminals are leading Iran. They hate the U.S. The longer this goes on, the worse things will be.
Casey to Poindexter. If there's no U.S. government contact, it is entirely possible that Iran and or Hezbollah could resort to the murder of one or more of the remaining hostages.
North to Poindexter. Despite our earlier and current protestations that we want all hostages before we deliver anything, this is clearly not the way they want to proceed. Bottom line is that if we want to prevent the death of one of the 3 remaining hostages, we are going to have to do something.
Again, the White House faces a choice. Go on with the torturous game, another shipment, perhaps another hostage, or as McFarland now recommends, call it quits. Poindexter and North pushed to proceed, and they asked Vice President Bush to consult with the Israeli end of the operation, this man, Amram Nir. The Vice President's Chief of Staff writes the minutes of their meeting.
Nir said, "We are dealing with the most radical elements. They can deliver, that's for sure. They fear if they give all hostages, they won't get anything from us. We have no real choice than to proceed." The Vice President expressed his appreciation and thanked Nir for having pursued this effort despite doubts and reservations throughout the process.
24 hours after the Vice President's meeting with Nir, President Reagan approves a 6th shipment to Iran.
The President chose to continue the policy. That's his choice to make. He was elected. I wasn't. It was a matter of the President going on with a very strong will to do what he wanted to do, against my advice.
Others in the White House were arguing otherwise with him, to continue the arms deal. Is it possible that North and Casey and others who were arguing that the deal continue had gotten very attached to the off-the-shelf operation, to the arms deal, because they wanted the profits from that to go to the Contras?
It's possible, yes.
Do you think that was the case?
Well, the complexion on the Hill, the outlook for getting more money there was not so great, so that's a very plausible thing. I think that's likely.
So the arms deal itself had become more important than the fact that the hostages had not been released?
Probably for Colonel North. For the President, the hostages were always the issue.
The hostages had become a cash cow for the undeclared war. The 6th shipment generates a profit of $8 million, but no hostages released. Instead, 2 more are taken. The Enterprise reaps another windfall with a 7th shipment in October. This time, the Iranians let 1 hostage go, but only after seizing another. It's the fall of '86, and the Enterprise is flourishing, off the books, in the dark, running its own foreign policy wholly unaccountable. By the bedrock value of the bottom line, it's succeeding. It's made a profit of $16 million by inflating those prices charged to the Iranians. Some of that profit has gone to the Contras, along with at least $34 million from other countries, and some of it to secret projects we'll never know about. It's as if Richard Nixon, told by Congress in the 70s to shut down the war in Vietnam, had nonetheless sustained it with private donations from multinational corporations, or as if some future president were to wage secret war against, say, Israel, with a slush fund from other governments. We'd find that preposterous. But it happened in the Reagan era without great outrage. It happened because our system of checks and balances, the gravity force of democracy, had failed us. The power of the government to deny is enormous, and the president's men worked hard to keep the country in the dark.
A version of how we will fund the counter-resistance through economic aid to Honduras. I think we'll stay with our standard line that we'll seek full funding and not try to go into any details.
Only a few reporters were enterprising enough to try to uncover what was going on.
in the summer of 1983, I wrote the first story that the United States was planning to mine the harbors of Nicaragua. At the time when my story appeared, I was called a liar. The story was flatly denied at the State Department and the White House.
Who called you a liar?
Well, Bill Casey. Bill Casey had some communications with my superiors and went out of his way to deny the story.
North Notebooks. Roberts called from the Times, working on premise that laws have been broken. Call from Claire, article very bad, making foreign policy around intent of Congress.
North's network tracked the handful of reporters who kept working the story. He knew exposure meant the end.
I contacted the National Security Council staff and asked them about what we had at that point, which was that there was a program that was being directed by a Colonel North, who was at that time virtually unknown, and that this organization was providing third country and private support for the Contras during the period of the congressional cutoff. Of course, at that point, the White House flatly denied everything.
Press office to McFarlane. Bob Perry, Associated Press, who can be tough but has awfully good sources, has one question for you. Quote, "It's my understanding that someday at end of 1983 or beginning of 1984, Reagan instructed McFarlane orally to arrange for private and other outside non-U.S. government funding for Contras. Is that true? What should I tell him?"
It is absolutely untrue.
Did you feel on the spot when a Bob Perry would come to you and ask you if that's true, did you feel constrained to tell him no? Because of...
Well, on that specific occasion, he happened to have his dates wrong, so he was factually wrong. It was pretty easy. But I take your point. When you know what is going on and somebody is nibbling at the edges, yes, it's always difficult to draw the line between presidential order and the public trust. And in this case, Perry happened just to be wrong. So it was easy to say, you're wrong.
Wrong on the facts, but...
That's right.
Not wrong on the truth.
Well, not wrong on the spirit of his charge. Could I be comfortable in saying no to that? Yes, I could be comfortable because of the rules of the game.
In 1985, the House Intelligence Committee officially asked McFarlane, as National Security Advisor, about reports of North's activities.
September 5, 85. Dear Mr. Chairman, I can state with deep personal conviction that at no time did I or any member of the National Security Council staff violate the letter or spirit of the law. At no time did we encourage military activities. We did not solicit funds or other support for military or paramilitary activities, either from Americans or third parties.
The stories appeared in the press. I call up the National Security Advisor. What's going on here is my question. He comes back and says, we're in total compliance with the Boland Amendment. We're not doing the things that the press says we're doing. We're not raising money. We're not giving tactical military advice. I'll come up and talk to you about it. You come down to the White House. We did both. We went down to the White House. We talked to the National Security Advisor. We had him come up to the committee. He talked to us there. And we had total assurance, absolute assurance, that the Boland Amendment was being complied with, not only in the letter, but in the spirit of the law. Well, we accepted that. Not just me. I accepted it. I have to take responsibility for that, but the other members of the committee did as well.
When McFarlane's successor, John Poindexter, was formally asked what he knew, his letter repeated and amplified the deception. Official after official lied, each making it harder for the next to tell the truth. It was his advisors who wrote the misleading letters to Congress, but reading them in court, the president reveals who inspired them.
I'm in total agreement. If I'd written it myself, I might have used a little profanity.
Thank you. I have no further questions on this particular letter.
Why didn't you subpoena North and McFarlane when this flurry of stories were circulating and you had written him and said, what's going on? And he wrote you back and said, absolutely not. There's been no violation. I give you my own word. Just to be sure. Why didn't you subpoena?
We had their cooperation.
When their deceitful cooperation.
Well, as it turned out, deceitful cooperation, but we didn't know that at the time. unsubstantiated stories on the one hand, the word of the President's National Security Advisor on the other, and in that circumstance, anybody, I think, would tilt towards the National Security Advisor.
What about Congressman Lee Hamilton? Do you recall whether or not he took any position with regard to this or had any interest in what the administration was doing?
Well, of course, I'm familiar with that name, but I can't pin down now where he was in all of that.
At one point, Lee Hamilton was chairman of the House Intelligence Committee.
Yes.
And
I don't recall what position he was taking or where he was. It's 435, I remember.
His disdain for the Congress led him to say, simply don't tell them. And the President really disdained those institutions.
He disdained Congress?
Yes.
How did that reveal itself?
Well, when any given policy initiative, and I should emphasize I'm talking about national security affairs, was proposed or adopted, the President's view was that the Constitution conferred upon him the authority to conduct the foreign affairs of the country. He did not seek to respond to criticism to the Congress in a careful way.
For all its powers of investigation, Congress accepted the White House denials, and the press accepted the official view of reality as its primary beat.
Mr. President, why don't we openly support those 7,000 guerrillas that are in rebellion against it rather than giving aid through covert activity?
Well, because we want to keep on obeying the laws of our country, which we are obeying.
I can follow up, sir. Do you think that the
Deception had become an inside joke.
Doesn't the United States want that government replaced?
No, because that would be violating the law.
There was not the kind of courage that you might expect from the editorial level of saying these stories are well reported, the facts are solid, let's keep going with it. There was a great deal of timidity at that time. There was not the sense of really getting to the bottom of this story.
If a president is popular, it has a very strong impact on the kind of press coverage of the presidency. The more popular a president is, the harder it is for reporters to write negative stories.
I thought we'd never get to the bottom of it. I thought at that point that the White House had won, that the White House had been able to contain this incredible scandal, and they've been able to contain it because of both the timidity of Congress, the refusal of members of Congress to do their jobs and to do serious oversight of what the White House was up to, and because the press had been unwilling to go against the government officials who were out there telling them these things which were not true.
The Washington press corps had backed away from trying to get at the truth, and Congress had backed down. In the nation's capital, it was business as usual. Having carried the day, the White House might have carried on indefinitely, acting alone, above the Congress and beyond the law. They didn't count on this.
My name is Gene Housenfuss. Could you coordinate tell us how you came to be here and shot out of the sky?
A cargo plane carrying military supplies to the Contras is shot down over Nicaragua. Within hours, an agent for the Enterprise relays the news to Washington in a phone call to a member of the Vice President's staff.
See, what was alleged in the paper was that out of the Vice President's office, we were running this operation in Nicaragua, that Housenfuss is involved in it, and it's absolutely, totally untrue. I can deny it unequivocally.
Oliver North knows the Housenfuss plane will be traced to the same company the Enterprise has been using to ship arms to Iran. The shadow government has begun to unravel.
North Notebooks, October 10, 86. Southern air transport exposure equals Iran hostage exposure.
But before the press or the Congress put two and two together, a Lebanese magazine breaks the news of secret U.S. overtures to Iran. including the gift of a Bible signed by Ronald Reagan and delivered by Oliver North. Again, the President of the United States denies the truth.
Do we have a deal going with Iran in some sense?
No comment, but could I suggest and appeal to all of you with regard to this, the speculation, the comments and all, on a story that came out of the Middle East and that once has no foundation, that all of that is making it more difficult for us in our effort to get the other hostages free.
Efforts at damage control begin on high. North's office may have been the command post, but the CIA, the Defense Department, the Attorney General, the Vice President, and the President have been involved in the Iranian arms deals. All of them, plus the State Department, are tangled up in raising money or supplies for the Contras. This has been no rogue operation.
There were people in the State Department, and they knew that Ali and the rest of them in the White House were up to something. One of the dangers...
Judge Abraham Sofair was legal advisor to the State Department.
In terms of Secretary Schultz, there's a tremendous danger in pursuing something a little bit, because then someone can say, you knew and you approved, and you didn't know really, and you didn't approve really.
Those outside of the original circle who were beginning to understand made it an effort not to know. I had one senior official, not in the State Department, but I won't mention him, who said to me, it was very hard every day. We spent a lot of time trying to avoid knowledge of that nonsense that was going on.
Not knowing had become a virtue.
To eliminate the widespread but mistaken perception that we have been exchanging arms for hostages, I have directed that no further sales of arms of any kind be sent to Iran.
Aren't you saying the terrorists, either you or your state sponsor, which in this case was Iran, can gain from the holding of hostages?
No, because I don't see where the kidnappers or the hostage holders gained anything. They didn't get anything. They let the hostages go. Now, whatever is the pressure that brought that about, I'm just grateful to it for the fact that we got them.
Could you explain what the Israeli role was here?
No, because we, as I say, have had nothing to do with other countries or their shipment of arms or doing what they're doing.
Are you telling us tonight that the only shipments with which we were involved were the 1 or 2 that followed your January 17th findings, and that whatever your aides have said on background or on the record, there are no other shipments with which the U.S. condoned?
That's right. I'm saying nothing but the missiles that we sold. And remember, there are too many people that are saying gave. They bought them.
I wrote a memo to Schultz urging Schultz to basically save the president from these people who were briefing him, to go in and tell the president what the facts were, and to get the president to disown it, to basically walk away from these kind of rationalizations and all this sort of little white lies and fuzzy things that were being put in his head prior to his press conference. That was the battle then. After that, that was a battle.
In that battle, some will stick with lying. It has worked so far. CIA Director Casey is summoned by Congress to testify about the arms deals. So North, Poindexter, and Attorney General Meese gather to go over the CIA's draft of his testimony. That draft lays out the agreed-upon cover story.
We in the CIA did not find out that our airline had hauled Hawk missiles into Iran until mid-January, when we were told by the Iranians. The cargo was described to us as oil drilling spare parts.
Oliver North enlarges the lie, changing the words to say no one in the entire government knew. When Abe Sofair sees this, he threatens to blow the whistle.
It would be unacceptable to me. I would be forced to resign.
You said in your deposition that you were worried about that there was a cover-up in the making at that point.
Yes.
And what would have been the implications of that?
Impeachable. Now you're talking about a violation of law, a felony.
Lying to Congress, in other words.
Lying to Congress, whatever else you have to do. Once you start down that road, the end is terrible, whatever it is for your clients.
Have you broken the law? No.
Appearing before closed sessions of the intelligence committees, Bill Casey says no one knew they were shipping arms. Poindexter also meets with members of Congress. He too lies. Then returns to his office to destroy documents he thinks would be politically embarrassing to the president. And all the while, the nation's highest law enforcement official, Ed Meese, is meeting privately with the players involved.
McFarland to Poindexter. I spent a couple of hours with Ed Meese today going over the record with him. It appears that the matter of not notifying about the Israeli transfers can be covered if the president made a mental finding before the transfers took place. Well, on that score, we ought to be okay, because he was all for letting the Israelis do anything they wanted at the very first briefing in the hospital.
North notebooks. Intent of president is important. Reagan said he would support. Mental finding.
It is a retroactive cover story. They will say that instead of actually signing an order as required by law, the president will simply have approved it in his head. Over the next 3 days, the Attorney General will keep the Justice Department's Criminal Division and the FBI out of his official inquiry. Instead, he relies on the political appointees in his inner circle.
Did you find that the president had authorized that policy, that decision, had made that decision?
In terms of the Hawks?
Mm-hmm.
Charles Cooper was one of the Attorney General's top assistants.
Tell you the truth, it's been 2 years now since these events were at the forefront of my mind, and my recollection, though, is that the president was not personally involved or authorizing of that particular transfer, but my recollection is at this point vague.
In the scramble to sort out the arms deal, which they already knew to be illegal, an undated memo providing evidence of the illicit diversion of money to the Contras is found in North's office. Over lunch here, the Attorney General is told about it.
And once the Contra diversion was discovered, Mr. Moyers, the other stuff, faded, into the background. Because the Contra diversion suddenly made the rest of it pale in importance.
Why did it make it pale?
For both political and legal reasons. The political reality was that this would be a very, very controversial a piece of information.
It could hurt the president a great deal.
Yes, it could. Yes, it could.
Less than half an hour later, North calls the Attorney General. At North's request, Meese agrees to put off meeting for 24 hours until the next afternoon. When they do meet, North asks if the cover page on the diversion memo has been found. It would have revealed who received and saw the memo. The answer is no.
Given the seriousness of the situation, why didn't the Attorney General or you immediately order that all the documents in Oliver North's and John Poindexter's possession be sealed so they couldn't be destroyed?
The point is, the destruction of documents that took place is something that only sealing offices with FBI agents and the rest of it would have prevented. You've got to have some reason to suspect that that is a necessary measure to take before you take such a dramatic action as that. If you hear rustling in your bushes
in front of your house, you don't open fire before you look out the window.
By the time he talks to the Attorney General, North has been shredding documents for a day and a half. After his own meeting with Meese, Poindexter begins erasing computer messages. By the third day, there will be nothing left. 5,000 messages will have been destroyed. Saturday night, Meese huddles with Casey in Casey's suburban home. As in his private meetings with Poindexter and McFarland, the Attorney General will take no notes. Oliver North works his shredder through the next night until accidentally tripping an alarm at 5 o'clock Monday morning. By then, there is little recorded memory of what the President might have been told.
And now I'm going to ask Attorney General Meese to brief you.
Do you still maintain you didn't make a mistake, Mr. President?
Hold it.
Did you make a mistake in sending arms to Tehran, sir?
No, and I'm not taking any more questions. In just a second, I'm going to ask Attorney General Meese to brief you on what we presently know of what he has found out.
Is anyone else going to be let go, sir? Is anyone else going to be let go?
No one was let go. They chose to go.
What about Secretary Schultz, Mr. President? What about Secretary Schultz, sir? Can you give Secretary Schultz a vote of confidence if you feel that way?
May I give you, Attorney General?
And
what about Secretary Schultz?
Why won't you say what the flaw is?
Well, that's what I'm going to say. What it's all about. Why don't I tell you what is the situation, and then I'll take your questions.
Why wasn't the President told?
The President was told as soon as we found out about it. The President knew nothing about it until I reported it to him. I alerted him yesterday morning. We still had some more work to do, and then I gave him the detail that we had yesterday afternoon.
We were quite convinced that if the President himself did not make this piece of information known to the public, that it could well lead to extraordinary possibilities in terms of possibly impeachment even. The point being that that if that had been disclosed by a news organization, for example, it was our view that it would not have been possible to convince many people that this was something the President was not involved in.
The administration got a hold of itself, and we then went on governing America, and I think extremely successfully. And I think that's been very frustrating to people who wanted to make another Watergate scandal out of the whole matter. We took a big hit, but we cut our losses.
There is that old line about "you can't fire me, I quit." My prayer is that the President is not further damaged by what has transpired. I remain convinced that what we tried to accomplish was worth the risk. We nearly succeeded.
Colonel North, please rise. Do you solemnly swear that in the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
In the summer of 1987, Congress finally launches a formal investigation. The committee is stacked with supporters of the President's policy in Central America and chaired by the men who accepted the deceptions all along.
Throughout the conduct of my entire tenure at the National Security Council, I assumed that the President was aware of what I was doing and had, through my superiors, approved it.
And I translated that expressed wish of the President to Colonel North and others on my staff. He also, the President, expressed this to the Secretary of State, Defense, Director Casey. It was no secret.
After working with the President for 5.5 years, the last 3 of which were very close, probably closer than any other officer in the White House except the Chief of Staff, I was convinced that I understood the President's thinking on this.
I believe the President has the authority to do what he wants with his own staff, that I was a member of his staff, that Mr. McFarland was, and that Admiral Poindexter was, and that in pursuing the President's...
The declaration that a President can do in office what he pleases is a presumption of power crying out for constitutional debate. but the committee does not appear eager to challenge it or to summon the will to question a popular president.
Clearly, from the outset, there were many decisions made that hampered the investigation. I don't know what the reason is, but...
Pamela Naughton, a former assistant U.S. attorney, was one of the committee's investigators.
The initial one was obviously setting an unrealistic deadline for the ending of the investigation. You cannot begin, especially such a complex and international investigation as we did, and then say, but we're going to finish it on this date. You don't know when you're going to finish it. You don't know where the investigation and the evidence is going to lead. The minute you tell a subject in the investigation, don't worry, we're all going to go away in another few months, there is every incentive then to simply stall and stonewall and wait until we indeed go away. And that's unfortunately what happened.
These are matters that ought to be determined by our process.
Knowing they had been deceived all along and told too little, they now seem concerned about learning too much.
It was a political decision to keep the time down. A president was in danger of being crippled by these events. And we did not think it was to the country's benefit to extend this out for a long period of time.
The people we were investigating weren't dumb. Serve as a basis for questioning of the...
A veteran of 34 years with the CIA, Thomas Polgar was also one of the committee's investigators.
And they realized perfectly well that since there is a deadline, they can delay the game, so to speak, and that any delay would be to their advantage.
Many of the documents we received from the department were long after the witnesses had testified. And then you would get handwritten notes showing that what they told you in testimony and what was in their notes were two different things. And then where could you go?
It was ridiculous that the de facto objects of the investigation, CIA, Justice Department, the White House, were made the judges of what they should release and what they should sanitize.
It was a conscious decision not to do certain things that would have revealed more about the president's activities. It became clear that we had not taken the steps that we should have taken to get at the whole truth.
We do live in
the whole truth would have taken Congress and the country to the heart of the Constitution. It would have meant, above all, deciding if the president's men had violated the law at his instruction or with his knowledge, whether or not Ronald Reagan did indeed take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
Here was a case, the only one that we know of, where the Congress's absolute power to fund the foreign policy of America was subverted by a White House that was determined to do something else, that converted American military hardware to money, and that some of that money found its way into supporting a policy that a majority of the Congress had opposed. I think when you get into that kind of constitutional subversion, you've got a very serious matter in your hands, and those who think it was, quote, a blip, don't understand the Constitution. That's what I believe.
When I hear you talk, I hear Warren Rudman talking about high crimes and misdemeanors.
Yeah. Well, if the president himself had known that, it would have been. There was no proof that he did.
High crimes and misdemeanors is a phrase pertaining to the impeachment process of the president, and we have no direct evidence. What we have is really indirect evidence of what the president's men did, not what the president did.
Left hanging was the issue of unchallenged presidential power.
If a president should decide to act on his own, then he is raising a substantive controversy or a substantive issue with Congress. He's taking something from Congress that it's supposed to have. But then if he lies about it, he raises a second constitutional issue because he's not responding honestly to Congress, and he's emasculating the system of checks and balances that the Constitution counts on. We're trained to believe that everyone is subject to the rule of law, and this has been true for centuries, that
ever since the 12th century, when the great lawyer said that the king is beneath no man, but beneath God and beneath the law, because the law maketh the king.
All I know is this is just going to taste wonderful, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Vice President Bush, did you know about the Contra aid or not, sir?
I sensed that we were sending arms, and I sensed we were trying to get hostages out, but not arms for hostages.
Did you really begin to smell a rat here? I mean, did
Not
you begin
really.
to say
No.
This is beginning to smell like arms for hostages?
Not really. I could see that it got a little close, but not enough to say, no, this is not arms, that this is purely arms for hostages. But you know, I'll tell you, I saw some reference in one of these stories to the 9 o'clock meetings. Let me tell you how it works. Somebody comes in there, like there's Don, Regan, me, and the president. Anybody hearing new on the hostages day? We got heard of that? And has it moved forward at all? No, but we'll ask Poindexter. Poindexter would come in the room. No, we haven't had a report. That's the end of that meeting. Then you go and talk about the budget or talk about something else. But when I hear that the hostages are going to be released in 3 days and it doesn't take place, I'm concerned about it. I'll express what's happening there. These people legitimate to deal with? Is it working or not? It's that kind of thing. But there's no question about trying to jump away from it. I support the president. I stood with the president solidly. I did not think it was arms for hostages. After all the facts were in and all the disclosures made and all the revelations about the individuals involved known to me, I say, hey, this was wrong. So you learn by your mistakes, you make corrections, and you go forward.
One last question.
Yeah, last one right here.
The power passed, and with it the secrets.
Solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Like his predecessor, George Bush has avoided responsibility for any wrongdoing in the Iran-Contra scandal.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability,
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
The basic constitutional issues still have not been confronted. Can a president, on his own, wage a war that Congress opposes? And how are we, the people, to hold our leaders accountable if we're kept in the dark about their deeds? What happened in Iran-Contra was nothing less than the systematic disregard for democracy itself.
It was, in effect, a coup, a spirit at odds with liberty. Officials who boasted of themselves as men of the Constitution showed utter contempt for the law. They had the money and power to do what they wanted, the guile to hide their tracks, and the arrogance simply to declare what they did was legal. The frightening thing is not that it almost worked, but that it could happen again. The state of democracy almost guarantees it will. The men responsible for Iran-Contra, except for a few, have been absolved, exonerated, or reprieved, and gone on to better things. The government continues to hide its dirty linen behind top-secret classification. And just last month, with little debate and scant attention from the media, the House and Senate agreed on a new intelligence bill, giving the president wider power than ever to conduct covert operations using any agency he pleases. Next time, the crimes of Iran-Contra may not be crimes at all, or even misdemeanors. For Frontline, I'm Bill Moyers.